Okay, today we need to do a very important lesson. We usually spend a day practicing this in class, and it is a lesson on summary. Now, I usually spend a day, like I said, practicing in class because I find that summary is a challenge. In your first language, second, third language, it doesn't matter. It can be a challenge because most people either write too much for the summary, they give too many details and too much information, or they don't give enough. It's usually one or the other. And so I wanted to teach you today 2 tricks to help you find the important details that you need to include in a summary. I always joke that, and I think I've mentioned this in class before, when you talk about a movie, if you ask someone, what was the movie about? And you want them to give you a summary. You could be like some people and say, it was about people. And that's not enough, right? Okay, what kind of people? What was happening? And then sometimes you talk to someone and they give you the whole movie, every character's name, all the details, what happens to everybody, and that's too much information. So we need to find a happy medium. So the first lesson that we're going to do with summary is nonfiction, and that's informational reading. That's a lot of what we're doing in our textbook, news articles, other textbooks that you do. And what we're going to be looking for is we're going to simply answer questions. We're going to say who. Whenever we find information or details that talk about who it's about, we can write it in. What? What's going on? In the real general sense, what are we talking about? Where? Sometimes this is important, sometimes it isn't, but it's usually pretty easy to find. The where could be a very specific city. It could be Earth. It could be Mars. It can be really anywhere. Same thing with when. Sometimes it's important, sometimes it's not. And when you talk about when, again, you can talk about it 1 o'clock, or you can talk about last year, or you can talk about today, okay? Modern times. Then you have why. Why is this happening? Okay? How is it happening? There are times that these questions can overlap. And sometimes even the what and the who you might switch up. And that's not really super important. What's important is that in the end, we all gather similar information, even if we've maybe put it in a different spot. And then we're going to use that to make our summary. So what I'm going to do now, this is going to make for a long video. I'm going to go ahead and read this article. I've attached it as a PDF so you can read it on the screen while I'm reading it, or you can print it out. And what I've done is I've annotated. I've kind of put in my what and whys and hows so that I can kind of come back and take notes on this later. Okay, so I'm going to read, and then when we get done, I'm going to kind of I ask you to pause the video at points to try to come up with your own answers. And then I'm going to give you the answers right away so we can kind of, again, as we would have done in class. So here we go. As world population increases, more food must be made to keep up. Let me say here. A new report says that people need to eat much less beef and lamb. And already I think that's the what, so I put that there. In the next 20 years, the world population is expected to reach 10 billion people. To feed everyone, people in richer nations will have to lower the amount of beef and lamb they eat, the report says. These cuts are also needed to prevent global warming, it adds. So I kind of feel like I've already found the why. So we need to eat less beef and lamb, and it's because the population is increasing. And then to feed everyone, we need to eat less and then also prevent global warming. Okay, so I already feel like I have my what and why, but I'm going to keep reading. The Earth is heating up. Scientists say that This is because of people burning natural fuels such as oil, gas, and wood. Burning them creates greenhouse gases which cause global warming. Greenhouse gases are also released by certain animals such as cows and lamb. Okay. Much more food will be needed by 2050, says the report by World Resources Institute, a nonprofit group. However, greenhouse gas released from agriculture will have to fall by 2/3 at the same time. The extra food will have to be produced without creating new farmland. It says, making new farmland could destroy the world's remaining forests. So this is more detail, but this is the detail that someone else is going to have to read. This can't go in my summary. It's good information if I need the details, but not for a summary. That's too much information. Okay, so I'm going to leave that. Let's stop wasting food. Meat and dairy production use more than 4/5 of farmland. They also produce 3/5 of all the greenhouse gas released by farms. Increasing the amount of food produced is the most critical step, the experts say. Another important step is not wasting food. How much of the food produced ends up getting wasted, or much of it gets wasted? So that starts me to thinking, how? Like, this is, again, another very specific detail. Well, how? How can we stop using this lamb and beef? Well, one, we can stop wasting food. Eating less meat isn't just saving animals, says Janet Ranganathan. She is an official at the WRI. It is important to do for humans to survive, she said. The new report was launched at the United Nations climate meeting in Poland. The UN is an organization of the world's countries. About 200 countries are meeting in Poland. They are discussing plans to slow global warming. Action must be taken to limit warming to a livable level for the future, the UN and scientists say. Again, it sounds like this is repeated, but that's a little more of the why, the global warming. Let's eat less meat and dairy. A different report discussed avoiding meat and dairy products. Again, the what? This is the single biggest way to reduce an individual person's damage to the environment, it said. It would help slow the great loss of wildlife too, the report added. The WRI report focuses on meat from cattle and sheep. When they digest food, they produce methane. It is a greenhouse gas. Beef is less than 3% of the diet of the U.S. citizens. However, it was responsible for half of all greenhouse gas released, said the WRI said. The report recommends that 2 billion people cut their beef and lamb eating by 40%. Okay, so that's a detailed how, okay? It especially called out the U.S., Russia, and Brazil. This would limit beef to about 1.5 servings per week. Most of the world's citizens would continue to eat relatively little beef, in the WRI's view. Tim Searchinger also works for the WRI. Other studies have called for much bigger changes, he says. We think that is a realistic goal, he said. In the U.S. and Europe, he said, beef eating has already reduced by 1/3 from the 1960s until today. So we have a little bit of time. We're really talking about today, like as in 2020, 2019, 2018. Okay, let's make changes to farming. Tobias Bedecker is an official for the World Bank, as an international group that tries to reduce poverty. One big concern, he said, is farmers. Governments give nearly $600 billion a year to farmers in 51 nations, says the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of governments. This money is given to encourage farming and keep prices low for farmers and customers. In the U.S., money from the government makes beef production cheaper by half, the WRI says. Without this government money, farmers could be hurt, Bedecker said. Advertising about the problem could help change people's diets, said Ranganathan. So could governments encouraging less meat in schools, hospitals, and other public institutions. That's a little bit more of a how, I think, right there, in discouraging in public institutions. There are other changes to farming that are needed. The WRI report says better feed is needed for cows to reduce methane production. Manure and fertilizer, which help plants grow, need to be managed better. Additionally, farms need machines that use less energy. So again, these are all hows, but this is a lot of detail, so I'm not sure I'm going to be pulling that out. What I'd like you to do is pause the video and go ahead and try to pull out what you think is the who, the what, where, when, why, and how onto a sheet of paper, or even just in your brain. But on the paper is a little bit easier. If you pause, that will make it a little easier for you, give yourself some time. When you unpause, you're back with us. So we're gonna fill this in. So who are we talking about? We're talking about the world, people, right? People on Earth, people in general. So really, we don't have to put down any specific person here. And we have the what. We need to eat less beef and lamb, right? We saw that on the first page. We saw that again on the second page too, okay? We need to avoid meat and dairy products too, right? Eat less of them, okay? And where? Where is this taking place? Globally. Global. Or the whole world, worldwide, right? We had both those words this year, worldwide. It's happening everywhere. Although in the United States, in particular, we have to do a good chunk of this. When I talked about that when we were reading it, this article was written at the end of 2018, so we could say 2018, or we could just say today or modern day, okay? Because it's ongoing. And why? This is the part. These are always, the why and the how is always a little harder. These are a little shorter answers. But the why, so let's see, because the increase of population, we need to feed everyone, and then we need to keep, if I kind of go from here, the global warming, and that was, they talked about the methane, right? Keep methane down or slow global warming, right? So I have kind of a couple different things, but basically we need to feed everyone because there'll be more people, but we also need to stop global warming. And again, they have a longer description of it, but too much for the summary. And then how? Well, basically, we need to, right, cut their beef and lamb by 40%. So we're going to decrease eating beef and lamb by 40%. Okay, again, there are some more details, and the advertising and farming changes. But again, that gets into more of the detail that eventually someone, if they're interested, will want to read. So now is another time to take a pause. If you can hit pause on the video, then what I want you to do now is I want you to, while you're pausing, I want you to look at your who, what, where, when, why, and how. I want you to look at all your answers and take all that information and plug it into a sentence or two and write it right down here. Write what you think is a good sentence to tell us what was that article about. Okay? Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 times before you get a sentence that sounds good. But take a minute and try to write that. Okay? Welcome back. Hopefully you had some time to really think about a summary. This is when I would normally ask for your suggestions, but I'm not with you to get your suggestions. So I'm going to write down the answer, and you can kind of compare what, this is actually an answer that last semester students gave me. Yeah, so that's what we're going to do. We're going to share that answer, and you can compare it to your answer. Oh, and I actually today, and then we also need to do this by 2050. So I am going to add that. I forgot to add that before. So you might want to change that. Okay. So, yeah, so we have some good information here. Let's go ahead and put this one down. Let's see. Over the next 20 to 30 years, people will need to eat less meat or beef and dairy. Again, that could be in our what. Change their farming techniques and stop wasting food because we need to feed the increasing world population and slow global warming. And that actually reminded me when I was writing this that on the how, you know, we talked about there was too many details. We could have just said, you know, improved farming. And then we also had, we did note that in there, but we forgot, we stopped wasting food, right? We did identify that as we were reading, but forgot to put it on our chart. But what we did was we just kind of pulled everything down, right? Our when, now, today. You don't necessarily have to have that, but basically in the next few years, right, people will need to eat less meat or beef and lamb. You could put that in there. And dairy, which we didn't have up here, but my class last semester really focused on that. change their farming techniques, and stop wasting food because we need to feed the increasing world population and slow global warming. So there's our why, our how, right? When, who, and what. We need to eat less meat. So, whoops, there we go. So I'm hoping that can give you a look. And like I said, just compare this. This is not the answer. You can see on this piece of paper, I actually have another sentence. I wrote one, then I wrote another. Usually in class, you know, we have a couple sentences that we combine together. So it's okay if it's not exactly this, but you should have something about people need to eat less meat around the world because we have an increased population, and beef and lamb add to global warming, something like that. And if you have some combination of that, then you've hit on a pretty good summary. When you started getting into more details, that's when we get into trouble. So I hope that went well, and we'll see you for fiction next.